Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining our South Australian Focus Stand By What You Sell webinar. This webinar has been organised in a partnership between Integrity Systems Company and the South Australian Department of Primary Industries and Regions. So we thank you very much for joining us. My name's Cherie Young. I'm the Communications Manager at Integrity Systems Company, and I'll be your facilitator for this webinar tonight. Now, before we get going with what we're going to cover off, just wanted to take you through what you'll be learning about and just give you some tips on questions and things like that. So we'll start off with Elizabeth Bradley, who's our Quality and Compliance Manager at Integrity Systems Company, will take you through the LPA requirements. And then I'm going to give you an overview of the eNVD update. Elizabeth will come back, talk about an NLIS update, and then we'll be joined by Denise Rendell, who's a Senior Officer of the NLIS with the South Australian Government. And she's going to take you through an update on the sheep and goat eID implementation for South Australia. Then we're going to be joined by two producers who've already adopted using eID. We've got Mitch Douglas, a sheep producer, and John Falkenhagen, who is a goat producer, who'll be coming in to do a Q&A where they can talk about the benefits that they've found along in their journey with eID. So before we get going, just a note, we've got a team of people from Integrity Systems Company in the background, as well as from the South Australian Government, who are here to answer questions about what you're learning about tonight. So pop your questions in that Q&A box in the bottom there as they come to mind, and the team will get to those. Any questions that were registered in your registration will also be answered in that box tonight. And after the webinar in the coming days, we'll send out an email with all the questions and answers, the slides from tonight, and a YouTube video link of the presentation itself, so you can watch it again if you need to. So basically that's the way it's going to run. I will now pass you to Elizabeth, who's going to take you through the LPA program and Integrity Systems Company. So I'll just pass you over now. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Cherie, and hi everyone. Nice to be here with you. So before I jump into the LPA requirements and how to meet those, I just wanted to give everyone a brief reminder where we sit in the red meat industry. So ISC is a subsidiary of Meat and Livestock Australia, and we provide the integrity systems or the assurance programs and products for the red meat industry. So we're guided by industry and government in delivering those products to you, the producers. So just as a reminder where we fit into the industry for you. So the two programs that are critical that Integrity Systems delivers are the Livestock Production Assurance Program, or LPA, and the National Livestock Identification System as well, or the NLIS. So we provide the database that's central to the NLIS system. So these two programs work together to provide assurance to our customers and our trading partners overseas that our livestock production meets their requirements. So it's really pivotal for export market access, and that's really important when we're actually exporting 70+% of our red meat overseas. So really important to make sure we can continue to sell our red meat and market it. I'll explain tonight about the LPA requirements and how that works with the NVD, as well as the NLIS requirements, just as a reminder as well. So LPA to start with, just as a general reminder about how the program works. So once you become accredited, you need to renew your accreditation every 3 years, and that involves completing an assessment and repaying your fee. So that keeps you having access to the National Livestock National Vendor Declarations through the LPA program. And it's also important that you understand your requirements around the standards, which I'm going to run through in a bit. And also, if you do get selected for audit, it's important to have that audit, because it's not a focus on your compliance so much as it is about providing assurance to our trading partners that our systems are working and the program is working. So being audited is part of the program. It's not as scary as it sounds, I promise. And all those requirements work together to provide that underpinning assurance that we need for our industry. So there's 7 different requirements within the LPA program, and they're contained in what we call the LPA standards. So that's what you need to meet when you sign up to the program. You're committing that you're going to implement these practices in line with the standards. So within LPA, the 7 requirements are around property risk, safe and responsible animal treatments, your stock foods, fodder crops and pastures treatments, fit to load, or the preparing livestock for dispatch, livestock transactions and movements, biosecurity and animal welfare. So they're the 7 core elements that the program looks at, and I'm going to run them through all for you now and highlight just why it's important, and then also what you can do to be ready in case you do get audited in that compliance sense. So the first one we'll run through is the property risk assessment. So this looks at your food safety risks that could be on your property and how you minimise those. So property risk assessments, I know risk assessments can also sound scary and overwhelming. It doesn't have to be hard, it doesn't have to be complicated. It's as simple as looking around and having a look at what could possibly contaminate your livestock. So when we talk about contamination, it's things that would end up as a food safety issue once they become food and hit that processing level. So the things to be ready for is to have a farm map and identify on that farm map your areas of risk. So this could be where you bury rubbish. It could be where you have old machinery stored. It could be old dip sites, anything of that nature where there could be chemical contamination from previous activity on that property as well. So being clear about where those areas might be, and then having in place mitigation measures around preventing livestock from accessing those areas, and also a system in place to identify any livestock that do accidentally become contaminated, because if it does happen, that's okay. We just need to let the processors know that there's that risk there with that animal. So just some overarching things around having that documented risk assessment in place. There are LPA templates to help you fill out that table out, and having a farm map to back that up as well. So really important around the contamination risks, because it does lead into food safety, because our red meat is food. So that's property risk assessment in a nutshell. The next requirement is around safe and responsible animal treatments. So this one has a lens in food safety, absolutely. It also has a lens into animal welfare. So we want to be making sure that we're giving effective treatments to the animals. So what we are administering is actually doing the job it's intended to do. And the other side of it is we need to be making sure that we're keeping thorough records and making sure we're clear about withhold periods or export slaughter intervals, especially when we come to fill out that NVD, because if they're in a withhold period, it can cause a chemical residue in the animal at processing, and that's food safety risk, and also it could be a market stopper in terms of shutting down market access. So really, really important that we're having good records around our animal treatments. Things to record when you're doing animal treatments is the animals you're treating, the date of the treatment, what you're treating them with, including the batch number of that product, its expiry date. It could be the label name or the active ingredient name, depending. A tip there is you can actually keep the label, take a photo of it rather than writing it all down. That you just have to, keep a record of what you've treated with and when. The other things around animal treatments is having equipment in good condition, clean, calibrated before you use it, making sure the people administering those treatments know what they're doing, and also being aware of withhold periods and export slaughter intervals. So that's accessing them from the labels on the products, or if they're not on the label, getting in touch with the APVMA. Other things around animal treatments is HGPs, if you use them, being clear about identifying them with a triangular ear punch, keeping really solid records around HGP use, and also identifying them on outgoing NVDs as well. It's really important to market access as well around that. Having good relationships and following vet advice is also really important with this, because again, we want to make sure that the animal treatments are being effective and you're not wasting money on things that aren't working. So just in around that, making sure if you do sell animals and they're in a withhold period, that they're getting declared on your NVD appropriately, so that withhold can be applied. The next requirement in LPA is around basically what your livestock eat. So the title of this part is really wordy. So it's around chemical use on your properties and where livestock might graze, or incoming feed that you might be buying, or treatments that you might need to apply around grazing areas that could drift onto those grazing areas. So it's all around minimising the risk of contamination that livestock might be exposed to through eating. So making sure if you are spraying chemicals on your property, again, you're keeping all the same records that you are for the treatment that we just talked about for animals. So what you've treated with, what the withhold is, and if animals do graze in a withhold period, that you're recording that that contamination risk if it's there. Other things around incoming feed, making sure that if you are buying feed in, that you are aware if it's got chemical treatments on it, and then you're observing that withhold period before feeding it to your animals, or you're aware of that risk when you do so, and then you can declare it on that movement document if you're selling them while they've potentially ingested something in a withholding period. The other thing around stock foods is reducing the risk of feeding them animal products. It's actually not allowed in Australia. So it's important around that, managing that risk of contamination as well. Other things around chemical treatments is making sure people that do sprays or agricultural chemicals applications are doing so under the supervision of someone trained, or they're trained themselves. So getting that qualification around chemical use handling is also really important. So that's sort of the crux of the food safety ones in LPA. The next one we'll talk about is the preparing livestock for dispatch requirements, or also known as fit to load. So MLA does have the fit to load guide, which runs you through all of the requirements to look for lameness, illness, injuries, that sort of things where animals aren't fit to load. So you can use that as a good resource if you're ever unsure. Fit to load requirements also looks at your time off feed and water beforehand, making sure that they aren't injured, diseased, sick, ill, not going to make the journey. If you have bobby calves, that they've met the right requirements around bobby calves and age times and things like that. The other thing is around your record keeping, so making sure that you've got your outgoing NVD, that you've done your checks, and that your transporter's aware, and that you're using a reputable transporter with accurate records to back all that stuff up as well. So fit to load is really important around animal welfare, and then maintaining that welfare through that journey. So really important within LPA. The next requirement I'll talk about is biosecurity. So this one's been a bit topical in the last 12 months with the foot and mouth disease and lumpy skin disease and Japanese encephalitis all around us. There's lots of risks on the horizon. So biosecurity is your defence as a producer about what you can do on your property to prevent diseases, pests or weeds coming on and becoming established and causing problems. So within LPA, you need to have a documented biosecurity plan. It can be in any template, so long as it's meeting the minimum requirements around controlling the risks. So things around biosecurity plans is they're only good if you've actually implemented them. It's no good just having them in the drawer. The things around biosecurity, it's mostly common sense, and there's loads of resources out there, so it can feel overwhelming. But just if you haven't got one, just take a template and give it a go. That's my best advice for you, and ask questions of people around you if you need help as well. We're always here as a resource if you need it as well. So some tips around biosecurity. It's really looking at controlling people, things, equipment, livestock coming onto your property. So if you buy in livestock, it's around checking them for health, maybe getting an animal health declaration around that health statement for those incoming livestock, keeping them quarantined for a period of time, allowing them to empty out, so you're reducing your weed seed risk, and also monitoring them for signs of diseases as well. So before introducing them to the rest of your flock or herd, or letting them roam free. Other things around biosecurity, put up a sign, have a visitor log, monitor people coming and going. If people don't need to go into livestock production areas, don't let them. Cleaning down equipment, wash down pads, things of that nature. There's loads of things, and it really depends on your property as to what you can actually implement and what's practical and useful and applicable to you. So no biosecurity plan will be the same. So it's really important to have a look through. The LPA template for the biosecurity plan, it comes in many forms, digital, paper, whatever you like. and it'll prompt you, it'll ask you questions and let you see the recommended measures that you might already be doing, or ones you might want to implement as well. So really important to have a good look at biosecurity and annually review your plan, or if things change as well. So keeping it current, making sure you know who to contact in event of an emergency, or you're not sure about something. It might be scary to report if you do suspect something, but it's better to report and it be nothing than not report and it be something. So just some little tips there around biosecurity and biosecurity plans. So yeah, the next requirement in LPA is around animal welfare. So animal welfare looks at adherence to the Australian standards and guidelines for animal welfare. There is standards for cattle, for sheep and for goats. So making sure that you have a copy of those standards and guidelines, which are free and available on the Animal Health Australia website and the ISC website. You just need to have a copy of them and read and understand them. You also need to complete your LPA animal welfare training through your LPA account. And also train any staff that do animal husbandry practices in those standards and guidelines. That they can do it online through the LPA system as well if you like, or you can just give them that training yourself to make sure they understand their requirements as well. So that's animal welfare as we whiz through. So the next requirement is livestock transactions and movements. So I left this one to last because it's a good segue into what Cherie will talk about. But this one is around completing NVDs and your NLIS requirements. So this is where it sort of links in together. So livestock transactions is when you're buying and selling or moving livestock around. So if you're moving livestock off your property because you've sold them, or they're moving off for adjustment or whatever the case may be, you need to complete an LPA NVD for that movement. And you also need to make sure that those animals are identified with an NLIS tag before moving off your property. So that's sort of the two requirements for moving off. And it's important to have all your records there that we've just talked about to back up answering those questions on that NVD. So you can see how doing your farm records kind of helps in making these declarations on those NVDs. The other requirements around this is when you're buying livestock in or bringing them onto your property. So with this, it's obtaining a copy of that NVD from the person you're receiving the livestock from, and checking it to make sure that you're aware of any treatment history or things of that nature, so that you're making informed decisions about where to put those livestock and who you can sell them to eventually. The other part around it is also if you're receiving livestock, those livestock need to be moved onto your PIC in the NLIS database within 48 hours of their arrival. So it's important that if you're not doing that yourself and you're relying on an agent, that you're checking that they've done that. So you can do that by having an NLIS account yourself, or and checking, or getting the agent to give you an upload ID. So with NLIS as well, sale yards, feedlots, abattoirs, they'll do those transfers off your PIC if you're selling. So it's only if you're buying from another producer or you're not using a sale yard that you really need to do that NLIS requirement. So really, really important. I'll talk more about that in just a little bit. So with the NVDs, it's also important that you're really aware that it is a legal declaration, and what you're signing is important information to pass through the supply chain. So NVDs are really important because it communicates that food safety status that the person buying needs to understand when they buy those animals off you. So invalid NVDs is a problem within the program, especially with the use of paper. So the common problems we see with NVDs that are handwritten is that we can't read the writing, that the questions don't all get answered, that they're not signed, or questions get answered yes and no, so it's not quite clear what the actual answer is to the question, and little things like the description just not being anything, like we can't really tell what you're selling, what you're moving. So we do also have the electronic NVDs, which make sure that you can actually answer all the questions that you need, that it's legible, and it's a real uplift in terms of making sure that NVDs are actually valid and useful to our industry. So I'm going to pause there and give my voice a break. I'm going to hand to Cherie, who's going to run you through the eNVD requirements and some exciting news that's happened in that space. So Cherie.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks for that great introduction into digital consignments, because I think the issues Elizabeth just touched on kind of speaks to why transitioning into a digital consignment space is really important. So I guess that's the big question: why transition to digital consignments? Tonight, I first of all just wanted to start with the challenges that are presented by paper forms. There's obviously issues with paper forms going out of date and no longer being used. It can it inadvertently end up with an out-of-date form that you submit without realizing. The other big one, like Elizabeth mentioned, is handwriting and just the difficulties in sometimes reading that information, and the fact that it has to then be entered, like the data entry has to keep going down the line for this livestock, whereas if it's contained digitally, it's all just there. So with this in mind, this issue in mind, Integrity Systems Company decided to develop a web-based system for the eNVD, which was launched in 2018, and that had lots of benefits. It removed that issue around not being able to read the paper forms or having them lost or damaged. It reduced a lot of duplication when filling them out, and it increased the completeness of the information, which all helps to strengthen our traceability and the robustness of our integrity system, which is obviously really important when you think about traceability. So there's lots of benefits with the eNVD system, but like anything new, there's always something that happened, was an issue, and that was the internet. The internet, and or lack of it in many locations, was the biggest barrier for industry being able to take up the use of the eNVD web-based system. So with this in mind, Integrity Systems Company went off again and came back early this year with a new app, the eNVD mobile app, which probably the biggest achievement of it is that once you've downloaded it in a service area, you can create consignments and transfer the consignment to your receiver using the app, using a QR code function that's built into the app, even when there's no internet. So this was a big hurdle to overcome to help that digital consignment process become more popular and more easily taken up by industry. So the app is, downloads are, I think, over 17,000 now, and usage is increasing every month. But I guess the biggest takeout of using it is you just need to check in with your receiver, your transporter, your sale yard, your agent, anyone that you're sending stock to, and just make sure that they are on board and able to receive a digital consignment through the app. It is a new technology and it is a new change, so it will take time to filter through. The adoption activities are going on all the time to get all the parts of the supply chain ready and able to use the eNVD app, and that work will continue. So biggest takeout is check in with your receiver. If you'd like to send a digital consignment this way, make sure they're okay. If they're not, you can print it out from the app, and you might sort of think, well, what's the point in that? But it does mean the data is contained digitally, so there is an advantage. But yes, you are able to share it by email or SMS or print it out as well. So we understand this is a big change, and that we've got a lot of resources here to help with the transition. We'd encourage you to look at those and call customer service if you get stuck. We're very happy to help deal with issues of getting you into this digital consignment mode. But yeah, the other thing is feedback. We'd love to get your feedback on what you're finding, because our technology team are constantly revising this app and building in new features. So gaining feedback from industry is a crucial part in making sure that that the end result is a great result for industry to use. So we encourage that feedback as well. But yes, I think that's where we're up to with the eNVD system. I just wanted to pass back to Elizabeth now, who's going to just touch on the NLIS before we move on to Denise. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Yeah, so I'm going to run you through just a reminder about the NLIS system and how it all works together. So the three kind of components of any traceability system is identifying locations where what we're trying to trace are. And so we do that through property identification codes, or PICs, which you get through your state department. The next one is identifying livestock, as I mentioned before, with an NLIS device. And then we have the recording of movements between PICs in the NLIS database is what we call livestock transfers. So with NLIS, the central database is where all this information gets stored. We collect all the PICs from the state departments, and once they're issued to you, and then we get a record of that. If you have a PIC, you can create an NLIS account, and that's where your tags, if you're buying eIDs, actually get registered to. So PICs are really important in terms of location. The next requirement around NLIS is the animal identification piece. So with the big shift for sheep and goats going to eID, we'll just give a reminder. So the eIDs is what the cattle currently use in Australia. So the difference between a visual tag and an eID is only that it has a microchip inside of it. So an eID has a little microchip that you can actually scan, and that will be encoded with numbers. So it's really important. And all those devices get approved by IAC, and they have the NLIS logo on them. So that's an important step, because we make sure that they're going to stay in the ears in the conditions where we have them. So that's one of the things that we do at IAC as well. The reminders around eIDs, it's one tag per animal, so you only really want one eID, because if you have more than two, when you go to scan, you might not be able to pick up the same tag every single time. So only one eID per animal. In cattle, it goes in the right ear, and in sheep and goats, it can be in either ear. It's really important to follow the application instructions carefully. Not all tags are the same. There's different types out there depending on your environment, your infrastructure. Different tags suit different producers. So it's important to follow those instructions and use the right applicator, because that can really have an impact on retention. For colouring systems, cattle have the white and the orange. So white tags go in cattle that are born on a property, and orange tag goes in an animal that's not born on that property. So they're called a post-breeder tag. For sheep and goats, there's the year of birth colouring system. That one's up on screen there for you. So if it's born on that property, you can use the year of colour system if you like. And then you've got the pink tags for post-breeder if they weren't born on that property. So you can still order eIDs in the year of birth colour as well. That's not going away. And yeah, so that's just an overview of the animal identification. The other part I'll talk about is just around the electronic side. So you can, if you have cattle, it's the same scanners, so it's the same equipment. The chips that are inside of the tags are coded with a unique number, which is the RFID number, and that's the one that gets transmitted into the reader, and then you can collect those tags from the reader and then use your computer to transfer them in the database. The other way to do electronic transfers of tags is there's a visual number that's printed on the outside of each tag, and that number contains your PIC. So if you buy those tags, it has your PIC as the first 8 characters. It also have the manufacturer's letter to say who supplied you that tag, whether it was a breeder tag or a post-breeder tag, and what species it was. So it's really important if you have both sheep and goats that you make sure that you're buying sheep tags or goat tags and then applying the right ones to the right animals, and making sure that you're not using sheep and goat tags on cattle and vice versa. You also then have the year of manufacture and the serial number to keep those tags unique. So those two numbers, the one that gets encoded on that microchip and the one that gets printed on the outside, they get linked together in the database and added to your PIC. So you can actually use either to do that transfer in the case. So that's important, just an overview of how it all works together. And in case you had any questions on that, so it's quite clear. The other part of NLIS is recording those livestock movements. So I talked about this just before. Anyone with a PIC can actually get an account, so that's free. You can get on and have a play around. You won't break it, I promise. And it is the person responsible for receiving livestock who does that transfer. So as I mentioned before, especially if you're buying from another producer or a private sale, you need to make sure that you're doing that transfer onto your PIC in the NLIS database to maintain that traceability. Important things around this is you can actually record the NVD serial number when you do those transfers, so it further links together those two systems. And it's also important just to make sure that if you are using, you know, sales through a sale yard or a livestock agent, that you're getting them to provide you with something called an upload ID or confirmation that they've done that transfer for you, so you know you've met your legal requirements around those transfers. But I will pause there and it's a good segue into legal requirements, and I'll hand over to Denise, who's going to talk you through the South Australian update on eID implementation for sheep and goats. So Denise, over to you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Good evening, everyone, and I'd like to thank ISC for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. I'm going to go through some of the things relating to eID in South Australia. And as everyone should be aware, South Australia, like the rest of the nation, is going to be implementing electronic identification for sheep and farmed goats. And I just want to touch on why we're looking to change to eID. Basically, our current system is no longer good enough to meet the market requirements. And in 2020, we actually did an evaluation of sheep at Victorian abattoirs, and it was done on several thousand sheep. We compared the traceability of those with visual ID to those with electronic ID, and we found that with visual ID, we could only find determines 70% of the locations that the animals had been on within the previous 30 days, in comparison to 99.6% for electronic ID. And this is a major issue for all of the states and for our markets, and certainly impacts on our ability to trace in a timely way in the event of a disease or a residue problem. And these impacts were actually on the supply chain are significantly greater if we take longer to trace animals. And as everyone is aware, we are an export-orientated system, and we export 70% of our sheep meat, 95% of our goat meat, and 98% of our wool. So it's really important that we're able to trace in a timely fashion. Next slide, thank you. In South Australia, we've determined there are two important timelines for implementing eID in South Australia for sheep and farm goats. The first one is for animals born on or after January 1, 2025. They'll need to be identified with an eID tag before they leave their property of birth. And this is irrespective of the size of the property. So you could be running one sheep or tens of thousands of sheep and goats, but you will need to identify them with an eID device. The next date is January 1, 2027. And on this date, everything that leaves a property will need to be tagged with an eID tag. And that's irrespective of how old the animal is. And as Elizabeth said before, we only want you to identify the animals with one electronic tag. So if you purchase sheep in after January 1, 2025, and it's got an eID on it, we don't want you to add another eID tag. It will only need to have one, and hopefully you'll transfer that animal onto your pick. But if the animal only has a visual tag after January 1, 2027, then you will need to apply an eID. If the animal's still on the property of birth, then you can put on a breeder tag. if it's no longer on its property of birth, that's when you'll be asked to put on a pink post-breeder tag. And just so that you're aware, the Australian Meat Industry Council of Australia has indicated that they won't be accepting sheep or goats without an eID after this date. Next slide. Thanks. So for sheep, really, what does this mean for producers? It meant the main thing to emphasise is the fact that we are changing the tag type. We're not changing a lot of the other system. You'll still need to use NVDs. In South Australia, you'll still be required to fill out a sheep health declaration, and you'll still need to record property to property movements. All of those parts of the system remain the same. It's just that you'll need to change the type of tag you use. Okay, next. There are some slight differences for goats, mainly because of the harvested rangeland goat sector. In that group of animals, they will be able to continue to move tag-free from the property of capture to either a registered goat depot, which there are 3 of them in South Australia, or direct to slaughter. So for those producers that do harvest rangeland goats, there is no change. For those producers with farm goats, it's still going to be the same as sheep. Goat moves from a visual ID tag to an eID tag, and still the same requirements for NVDs and transfers as well. So just so that people are aware, the definition for a harvested rangeland goat is a goat that's captured from a wild state. It's not born as a result of a managed breeding program and is not subject to any animal husbandry practice or treatment. Next. So the South Australian government has, through the recent budget, announced that there is going to be a support package to help the supply chain transition to eID. And we're going to be looking at an incentive for tags purchased from January 1 of this year through to June 2025. And it looks like it will be roughly $1 a tag, so that basically it brings the cost down to about $1 a tag. It is important to realise that it is intended to prioritise the tagging of animals that will be entering the supply chain after January 1, 2025. So if you've got sheep or farm goats that are going to have go for slaughter in the next 12 or 18 months, there's no point putting on an eID tag as you're they're unlikely to be scanned at many of the South Australian abattoirs or sale yards. There will also be a grant available for essential infrastructure across the supply chain. So this would be scanning equipment, software, and I anticipate that the guidelines for those will be made available in the next few weeks. Thank you. So just to reaffirm some of the things that producers will need to do, they'll need to purchase NLIS accredited electronic devices for sheep and farm goats. If you move animals, you will still need to get them transferred on the NLIS database, ideally, within the 2 days of being moved. And this is for property to property movements. So we're talking about agistment, 2 properties under the same ownership, or purchased directly from another producer. So this could be through an agent, an online auction, or off of Gumtree or Facebook. there are producers out there that have got equipment that can actually scan cattle tags. Exactly the same equipment can be used to scan sheep and goat NLIS ID tags. So people may have access to some of that technology already. As Elizabeth said, we don't want you to use cattle tags on sheep or goats, or goat tags on cattle, or sheep tags on cattle, for instance. And when you do order tags, please ensure that you use the, please ensure that you purchase the right type. So if you've got goats, please check with the reseller or the manufacturer that you're purchasing from that you are ordering goat tags. And if you run sheep, that you're ordering sheep tags and only apply them to those species. As I said, there will be a tag discount for tags purchased in the relevant year, and we're really trying to encourage that it's for stock that you're going to keep. And the other thing is that what we really, really do recommend that you have an NLIS database account, as you will be able to receive various notifications and information back about any devices that you've got registered to your property. So I think I'll leave it there and hand it over to our producers to talk about their experiences with eID.
Thank you very much, Denise. It's very informative. Yeah, I'd just like to welcome Mitch Douglas and John Falkenhagen to the webinar now. Mitch is a sheep producer from Western Flat. He's been using eID for about the last 4 years, and John is from a goat producer from the Menindee region who's been using eID for 9 years. So they have got some experience with this. So we thought we'd bring them on to ask them a few questions. Just before I go on, just a gentle reminder that we have got a Q&A function in the webinar tonight. There's a box at the bottom of your screen. So please feel free to pop your questions in there. We've got ISC and PIRSA representatives on hand to answer them. So yeah, drop them in as they come to mind. Okay, so we've got Mitch and John, welcome.
Thanks, Sheree. Thank you.
Yeah, good to have you here. We're just going to go through a few questions with both of you, so we look forward to hearing what you've got to say. But I guess the first thing is just if you could outline, perhaps we'll start with you, Mitch, some of the key benefits that you've found from using eID.
Yeah, definitely. And probably John and I are probably going to overlap a little bit here as we go through it for the reasons why we implemented eID to start with. But probably the first one is time saving, being able to draft mobs of sheep for myself. By myself, I work all by myself. So being able to easily draft mobs of sheep to save time has been a big thing for me. And also to track data, to track the data that I want to keep note of in fertility and fleece weight and weight gains of my livestock and stuff like that. You know, your data and your numbers tend to not lie, whereas your eyes sometimes can be a little bit deceiving. So that's probably the two big reasons for myself getting on board.
Excellent. What about you, John?
Yeah, Mitch is right. We're going to overlap. Initially, it was time saving. So we used to tattoo, would take us 4 days, me and a staff member, whereas we went to eID tags, it was 2 staff members did it in a day. So save 75% of the time. One of the other things is accuracy. If you've got to read a tag, we all do it. If you're doing 1,000 in a day, someone's going to read 643 instead of 346. And then that stuffs up a whole day's work. If you can scan it, no one can get it wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, massive benefits there, like just in the, less people, much need for less people, quicker, and the accuracy is just, can't beat that. Thanks for that, John. Then I guess the next one we had here is just, can you share a couple of examples of how using eID is benefiting the production side of your business? I'm going to start with you, John.
Yeah, it's that data tracking and saving time. Mitch is right. We're tagging at day one now. We can weigh them so much quicker, scan straight to the phone as opposed to trying to type in a number. Preg scanning straight to the phone. That's just how quick it is and why we're using it.
Yeah, excellent. Mitch, have you got any examples of just how things are benefiting the production side of things?
Yeah, probably one. I'm pretty big on sort of early weaning with my livestock, sort of the oldest being 12 weeks, youngest being sort of 6 weeks, so it's pretty early. And everything's weighed at weaning time, and then we reweigh sort of a month later with a worm egg count in place as well. And I guess what that does is you can just track how your livestock are tracking, and if they're not performing, you can start sort of pointing fingers at why they may not be performing. Whereas if you're just going in blind and looking at them visually, you might tend to think they're not putting on weight or they're doing more than what they actually are. So that's probably a big one for me is, yeah, just tracking individual weight gains on, post-weaning, which can be a pretty important time to really see how they are progressing.
Very good. Then another one, I guess when you're starting out with something new, there's always some challenges that might need to be overcome. So I just thought it might be good to ask you, John, we'll go to you now, John, just how have you overcome any challenges that you've encountered since you started using eID on your goats?
One of the big challenges, especially we started with dairy goats, retention rate, infection rate, retention rate low, infection rate high, easily overcome by using disinfectant and taking the extra 10 seconds to put it in the right place. And that just solves all the problems. I talk about it being quick and easy, but the bit that you take your time with is getting that tag right the first time, use disinfectant and get it placed right, and then your life is easy ever after.
And that's helped with retention issues, John?
Yeah, retention issues,
yeah,
I would say in my herd, 99%. Easy.
Yeah. And that photo there's showing a good placement?
Yep, that's where you want to put them. Middle third of the inner third is how I describe it. And for us, that's exactly where it needs to be.
Okay, fantastic. So disinfectant and take some time at the beginning. Get it right. Okay, good stuff. Mitch, any challenges you've overcome in your journey with this?
Yeah, probably the big one for myself, although you might laugh being how old I am, but technology was probably one of the harder things to get on board with, but with good customer service with the company that I deal with, it was overcome quite easily. And then you can really start to dive into many different pieces of data that you want to collect, and you really could be there forever of what you want to try and chase in what you're trying to produce. But once you get over that hurdle in how to use it effectively, it really becomes quite simple and pretty easy to use.
Okay. And so with all that data, I imagine, is there still parts of that data that you still see room for you to explore, like that you could apply? Yeah,
huge data. I mean, there's really only a few traceabilities that I'm capturing at the moment, and you could continue to go further and further and further. How far I will go from a commercial producer's point of view is unsure. At the moment, as I said, it's mainly, fertility, fleece weights and weight gains and stuff like that. But I mean, if you wanted to, you can keep going into muscle scanning and collecting that data and going further and further and further. So at the moment, I think I'm just scratching the surface, but now that I'm getting involved with it, I'm getting a bit more of a drive and understanding and passion for it. You can just keep going.
Very good. Okay, Mitch, just while I've got you there, I just wondered if you could give us some thoughts on infrastructure that you think, that you need to get started, or, I imagine the sky's the limit. You can, so maybe take us through what you think's where a good place to start is.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, getting tags and a implant, implant gun, for tagging is where you start, and then get a wand from any of the reputable brands that you want to go with. You can then go into an automatic drafter and you know, go from there. So the initial outlay for cost can be minor, and then, as I said, you can keep going, and yes, it can get greater, but I guess the more you spend, the quicker things become. It saves money on labour and stuff like that as well.
Excellent. What about you, John? Any tips for goat infrastructure you need from the goat side of things?
I'm a bit like Mitch.
Yeah.
You can keep it really basic. If all you're doing is purchasing stock and all you need to do is scan for the database, you just need a wand. Most of them come with data packages now. But it's how much data and what data. Mitch is scanning fleeces. I don't have those. So we're after different data, and you've just got to find what suits you. And there's heaps of things out there. So the basics is a wand, and then scale up or down from there. Talk to as many people as you can before you purchase. I mean, I purchased that gun there, which is a really smart one. In the end, I probably only needed a really dumb one because my smarts is in the phone. So I would talk to as many people, go to as many field days to get what suits you, because what suits Mitch doesn't suit me, doesn't suit you. And there's so many different things. So get the information before you purchase.
Yeah, I reckon there'll be a lot out there, lots to choose from. So that's really good advice. I guess just while I've got you there, John, you know, with this national rollout of the tags coming through, I was just wondering what your insights might be on, you know, what possibilities you see flowing from this once it's nationally rolled out. You know, how do you see this benefiting industry?
I think it can benefit industry in many ways. Australia exports 70% of its produce, so we command premium markets, and this is a way of ensuring that we can continue guaranteeing to our customers. If we ever have, worst case scenario, a biosecurity threat, this gives Denise the power to trace it very, very quickly. And then from an on-farm perspective, I mean, the sky's the limit of what we can use it for. So it's only positives from me.
Excellent stuff. What about you, Mitch?
Yeah, similar to what John just said, but
yeah,
potentially producing better quality, you know, meat or fleece or whatever it might be from a sheep point of view, improve productivity on each individual farm. I mean, we talk about how short, you know, the labour shortages at the moment, how difficult it is to find labour. This could have a massive impact on that to try and get through the issues we're having at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and then I guess I just had a general question or general call out for any advice, just any broad advice you might have for producers out there that are, you know, getting started on this. Mitch, any just general advice you might have?
Yeah, I think John probably nailed just before. Just speak to as many people as you possibly can. Get out to field days. They're always happening. Speak to people. They're not going to buy it. They will help. And yeah, that's probably it. Just as soon as you get involved, it becomes easy. It becomes easier. So yeah, I think John nailed it before about, yeah, just getting out to those field days and talking to as many people as possible.
Yeah, sounds good. Absolutely. What about you, John? Any other words of wisdom?
I think that talking piece and getting the tags in right, and once you've done that, you're laughing.
Oh, very good. Okay, well, look, is there anything I've missed? Anything else that you think we need to cover off before we're nearly ready to wrap up? Think we've got it covered? Fantastic. Okay, well, look, there's a few questions still there sitting in the Q&A. Keep them coming. We're very happy to answer them. Got people on hand with expertise in this area. Before we go, there's a survey link we've just put in there as well. It would be great if you could fill that in. We'd love to get your feedback on this webinar and any tips or suggestions for future ones. We're happy to take those as well. There's some information there to help from Integrity Systems Company, different websites and email addresses to get through to. There's the QR codes to download the eNVD app if you'd like to have a look at that. As mentioned before, at the beginning, we will be sending out a post-webinar email with all the details from tonight, including a video recording of this webinar, so you can watch it again if you need to. So yes, I guess finally, I'd just like to thank John and Mitch for joining us tonight. It's been great having some producer insights. Big thank you to Denise Rendell for coming in with great information from South Australia. Elizabeth did a great job in summarising, going through the LPA program. We hope that you found this information useful. Thanks to the ISC team and the PIRSA team in the Q&A tonight. Yeah, we'll be sending out that post-webinar email in the coming days, so keep your eye out for it, and thanking you very much for your time this evening, and have a good night.